Hello, everybody, and welcome. We're going to get started in a moment. We're going to give some people the chance to join, grab a coffee, and get ready for the presentation. So just bear with us. We'll get started in a few moments. For those just joining, your computer screen is not frozen. We're just waiting and giving people a few moments to join. We're going to get started in about 1 minute or so now. All right, everybody, we're going to jump into this. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us at our Flare Academy training. This training is going to be deep privacy in the age of the Panopticon, Opsec fundamentals. So, we're going to talk about a few things here, which is privacy and Opsec. They go hand in hand. Very excited to get this started. My name is Mitch Cohen. I'm a senior technical support specialist at Flare. I've been using Flare for a very long time now, and I've been in the privacy space for about 6 or 7 years. On top of that, though, I've been obsessed with my privacy ever since I was a young child. So before we get started, we're going to talk a few housekeeping items. The good news is that this deck and recording will be available to access in the Flare Academy Discord following this training. You can find the Discord join link in the chat, and the Discord link will be emailed out following the training. Good news is right after this training is we'll be hosting a live Q&A on Discord where I'll be answering questions in the general voice channel right after we're done the training. Feel free to ask questions during the training. I'm going to try and answer as many as I can as we're going. But anything that's missed, we can talk about in the Discord. So, as let's get started. So, first things first, what is a panopticon? A panopticon is a physical structure that is designed for surveillance. Imagine, if you will, a full 360 dome that has all cells inside of it with a tower in the middle, which is able to surveil any cell at any time. The reason we wanted to focus and put Panopticon on a title because this architecture is a fantastic metaphor for what the current world of surveillance is. It's everywhere, it is ingrained in our society. And so, what better way to add a physical aspect to this than to talk about what a panopticon? So, we're going to jump in. This is what we're going to learn today. We have introduction to OPSEC, encryption, hardware, operating systems, networking, and a few other ways to practically stay safe online. First thing I want to start off with is that privacy is a human right. So, straight out of the 12th article of the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights is no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. The very interesting thing about this was made in 1948. No one could have anticipated the technology that was going to come after this. And so this hasn't been updated since 1948. And this is why privacy is a human right, and people often forget that. Privacy is not just about you. It's about your neighbors, it's about your friends, it's about strangers. I've heard a lot of people say in the past that I don't care about my privacy. I have nothing to hide. But it's not about just you. In this case, what ends up happening is that those who choose to ignore their privacy, the people who need their privacy will suffer the most. So I always use this example, which is very specific to say that you might not need your privacy today, but someone you know might. If we live in a world that just accepts the violation of our privacy, then what's going to end up happening is the people who need it are going to suffer. So, an abuse victim who wants to hide from their abuser, they need their privacy. But if we've created a world where privacy doesn't matter to anybody, then it's going to be a challenge for them to have it when they need it. It is such an important thing that we talk about how it impacts everyone in the world. And that's why it's important to fight for privacy so that you can actually choose to have it when you need it. So, what's operational security? You're going to hear this a lot today, otherwise known as Opsec. So, it's kind of in the title. This is how you secure your operations, whether in business or within your day to day life. So, this comes down to identifying critical information, assessing the threats and vulnerabilities around that critical information, and then implementing the protective measures to stay safe. Online, when people talk about OPSEC outside of business, it's about themselves. It's about how am I going to lock down my OPSEC to make sure that I'm not exposed in the world in a way that I can be surveilled or targeted or any of these things. OPSEC is a big realm of things you need to do, a lot of which we're going to go through in this presentation today. But I'm really excited to kind of talk to you about OPSEC, how it impacts privacy, and what people do. So, here's an important question I like to ask. Where are you on the privacy scale? I've had conversations with thousands of people about this. There are those who do not care about privacy. They say, I have nothing to hide. And to quote Edward Snowden, people who say I have nothing to hide and then they don't need their privacy is the equivalent of saying, I have nothing to say, so I don't need free speech. That's where you have these realm of people who aren't really informed on how critical privacy is. Then you have all the other way on the spectrum, which is I need to live in the woods, off grid. I will not use a computer. I will be a ghost in the world. Pretty impractical. It's kind of an internal joke among the tech industry that the more involved in technology you are, the more to the I need to live in the woods scale you want to go towards. But in the world we live in today, the best place to be is balanced in your needs, which is caring about your digital exhaust. Now, digital exhaust is the data and information you put out into the world of what's going to happen. So this is the scale that we kind of look at of where are you in the privacy scale, but this really depends on who you are, which brings us into this next section, which is what is your threat profile? A threat profile is the archetype of an individual that you are and how you will work within your OPSEC and your privacy to stay safe. So a small business and startup has a very different threat profile than an activist and human right defenders. Unless your small business and startup happens to be in that space, these are where things change on a regular basis. If you don't see your threat profile here, I would love for you to post it in the comments because maybe I missed one. Because a threat profile is trying to group an identity of people. And I don't think I caught them all with this. But the ones that are on the left side typically have a little bit more of a threat profile that needs better OPSEC compared to people on the right side. And that's where threat profiles become important because if you can put yourself in this group, there are communities out there that will help you secure and do this properly. So, we're going to talk encryption. We're going to get into more details about OPSEC and privacy as a whole. But before we do, I want to take a quick moment to talk about this entire presentation. I realized it this morning as I was going through the slides that I designed this presentation with the Flare team specifically to help you secure your identity and control what information you're putting into the world. But in doing so, ironically, I've created a map for how you can look at other people in the world through open source intelligence to compromise their OPSEC. So it's really important that you have both sides of this scale. And we're going to kind of talk about at the end where you fall on this scale of what's important and how you would do these types of things. We're going to try and keep it balanced on the sides. So encryption, it's been around for a long time, and we're going to break this down into three levels. There's a basic understanding, an intermediate understanding, and an advanced understanding. Encryption is a fundamental part of the internet, which is why it's important to understand as of today. So we're going to start with a basic understanding. If you can think of a cipher, so in this case, the most basic cipher in the world, A equals 1, B equals 2, so on and so forth. And if you want to spell the word face, it would be 6135. Imagine that encryption is a cipher which evolves more and more with technology and mathematics and everything inside involved in there. At its core, this is the most basic understanding of encryption that you can have. Then you get to the intermediate understanding. You have a symmetric versus asymmetric encryption. This is focusing on the key that is used. So the key in this case is this cipher that we spoke about here. This is the A equals 1, and this is where a symmetric encryption is there's one key that both parties have that allow the data to be encrypted or decrypted. So with this cipher you have on the left, you would know that face is 6135. Asymmetric encryption is a little more complicated where there are two keys that allow the data to be encrypted or decrypted. So instead of just this one cipher, each party holds a key which can be a bunch of different things. It could be a string of text, it could be a combination of characters, it can be super advanced depending on the needs of what you're trying to encrypt. This is more of an intermediate understanding. And then there's the advanced understanding. Now, I'm not going to go through each of these advanced understandings and talk about them because that's not why we're here today. This slide is really just here to demonstrate how you can understand encryption. And if you want to learn more, I've included these advanced understanding based topics within the encryption world that you can go research on your own and kind of explore in more detail. Encryption, otherwise known as cryptography, crypto, not cryptocurrency, we'll get to that, but cryptography is a fundamental part of the internet and how communications and things are done. So let's talk about for a second where to utilize encryption. And the answer is everywhere you can. It's important that you encrypt as much as possible. So here are some of my favorite encryption based apps, which is we have the Proton suite. This is your email. This is your VPN. This is your storage. Right in the center there, you have Signal. Signal is what I use for all my friends and family. I ensure that they encrypt all of the communications that we have with each other, not because we have something to hide, but because we just want to be able to speak freely without any challenges or anything like that. And then my favorite note-taking app where I write in my diary is Standard Notes, which I've been using for a long time, which as of recently is part of the Proton family. There have been a lot of rumors that Signal isn't safe or Proton can be read, and these are these are non-factual based rumors that are just rumors at their core. A lot of people don't understand that encryption is fantastic to prevent other people from looking at your stuff. But what happens if you have an encrypted Signal account and you're talking with people and don't read it, but then they get access to your phone? And then they could just look through your phone, which has the encryption key. They can look through everything. A lot of people will often say, oh, this isn't secure. Oh, you shouldn't use this because in reality, if law enforcement has taken your physical device, which for the record, if law enforcement is coming for your physical device, you have much bigger problems than encryption at this point that you need to worry about. This is where it's essential to understand that if a third party wants to look add any of your email, messages, or written notes, in these cases, they will have to come and take your physical device to do so, which is important. A lot of people use cloud storage. You have your Google Drives, you have your Amazon Photos, all these different things. One of my friends in my network will always say that it's essential to encrypt things before you upload them to the cloud. Because when you do this, you make it so that the cloud can't even see what you've put on their system. There's nothing that stops a cloud infrastructure from looking at your data that you've put there. But if you encrypt it with tools like 7-Zip, I highly recommend you Google encryption tools because there are a lot of them depending on your needs. If you're encrypting it before you put it on the cloud, which is someone else's computer basically, you'll do a great job in keeping your information safe and protected on that front. If you have another app you use that is really focused on encryption that I haven't included here, I'd love for you to add it in the chat so that I can see it and talk about it at a later point or address anything that comes up about it. Next, we're going to talk about hardware. As I sit here with my 6 cell phones in front of me, this is an important conversation of what we're going to talk about because it's not just about the software, it's about the hardware you use on top of this. So, what's important to know about hardware? Like I just said, it's not just about the software. You can have the most advanced software in the world that encrypts everything and keeps you private. But if it's on a phone that doesn't respect any privacy or OPSEC measures, it's almost counterintuitive in this space. So, this isn't just phones and computers a lot of people think about. Think about your smart assistants, your smartwatches, your car. One of my favorite studies of last year was Mozilla, who put out a study that cars abuse their data so much that they are the least privacy friendly item that's out there these days. And really, anything else with an external connection is considered smart. This is the hardware you need to focus on. Physical access to devices is a massive thing. There's lots of stories of crypto wallets that were able to be hacked because they had physical access to it. If you leave your cell phone in another room and you walk away for a few minutes and come back, there are things that can be done to it. And this is where using things like tamper-proof designs, fingerprint locks, and secure startup, it's important to keep them safe because if someone has access to your physical device, what's very popular is known as a side channel attack. Side channel attacks can be software oriented, but people can actually use the voltage of a system or the actual chipset that's inside of it to enter your hardware and obtain the information that they're looking for. I believe it was either last year early on or the year before that that someone was able to use a side channel attack on a Tesla car to be able to gain access to it in that space. This is so important to understand that hardware is at the same level of software, that if you don't understand the hardware you have, how are you supposed to protect it? You can, like I said originally, all the best software in the world becomes a moot point if the hardware isn't up to par of what needs to be done there. So, important things to remember about hardware. In today's world, we are at an all-time level of connection, whether it's through GPS, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, NFC, RFID, sub-gigahertz. It's lesser in the privacy realm, but still related on the physical access of things. You might have seen this before. This is called a flipper zero. A lot of people don't know this about a flipper zero, but one of the reasons that it was originally made, from what I understand was read somewhere, is that it wanted to show everyone how not secure the world is today. With a flipper zero that I just showed you, I can open garages. I can scan an RFID chip and enter someone's condo building or office space. These types of things are just out there, and these are all hardware focused devices, especially when we look at our devices that we have with Bluetooth, Wi Fi, GPS. A single one of these, whether online or in person, can expose you to countless others. It just takes one data point to be compromised for everything to fall apart within someone's individual OPSEC and privacy. I love the modern world. I want to be the first one to say that the way that everything connects for collaboration, innovation, and communication is fantastic. I wouldn't have a job without these things that are available today. But it's important to understand that these types of things can also leave you exposed if you're not careful with what you're doing. But again, we come back to what threat profile do you possess that you need to really choose where on the scale of privacy you want to be. And the last but not least is one of my favorite points is off doesn't mean off. So when you turn your GPS off, when you put your phone on airplane mode, on some devices, it's very easily turned back on. And that's where it's not really off. I did some research before this and looking, there are some devices out there that even when your phone is off, they have low level power to make it so that it can be found in case it's lost or in case something is happening, which is pretty scary to think that when you turn your phone off, you're under this illusion that it's off, but it's not really off and able to protect you in the way that you want. So let's talk about operating systems. We're going to start with your desktop and then we're going to go into mobile. We're going to talk about Windows and Mac OS, the pros for Opsec. So we're going to look at Apple first. Apple is great at data minimalization. They're collecting less data compared to their competitors. They have tight control over hardware and software. So a lot of apps that are out there that want to be in the Apple ecosystem go through a painful process of needing to be approved to be put in their app stores. Additionally, and this is changing a lot over time, is Mac OS has fewer malware and ransomware threats because it's first of all, it's newer and it's reducing the risk because there's less experienced users who are using Mac OS and they kind of keep it tight knit like that. As I mentioned though, this is really changing in the modern world as they get more market share of people using Mac OS and these Apple devices for computers. Attackers are going to start looking at building ransomware, which they already have, and malware or spyware to really focus on this. The pros of Windows, BitLocker encryption. We spoke about encryption. They offer a robust way of doing so that if your device is actually lost, but it's encrypted, it's relatively safe in that you don't have to worry about someone being able to break that encryption. Now, of course, there are always edge cases of someone being able to do this. If your BitLocker encryption key and your password is 1234, there's a high probability that someone might just guess that. But it does give a advantage in the world of OPSEC of keeping things encrypted on device. Windows 11 supports Windows Sandbox, which is basically, and we'll talk about sandboxes more, a computer inside a computer. It's a little virtual machine that allows you to explore and do different things so that you're not putting your main machine at risk. This is fantastic if, hey, I want to go to a website. I'm not sure if they're going to try and steal my information. Let's do it on my virtual machine that doesn't have any information. So the Windows Sandbox is a great pro for OPSEC, and we'll talk more about people who utilize virtual machines and sandboxing after. And then another benefit to Windows is you don't need the internet to use your computer with Windows. I find that they make this harder every single day, but you can be completely offline, if you believe that off is off in this case, without relying on OneDrive, Microsoft Teams, or other cloud based services. You'll still be able to use your device as is. There are challenges that come with this, like ensuring that it's going to be fully off after when you reconnect, that things don't sync automatically. But luckily with Windows, there's a large community online of people who actually want to do different things in this area to make it as safe as possible. So I'm going to take a quick stop here. I'm just going to look at a few questions that I see on the side here. I think that first of all, the one thing I could say is that the flipper is not banned in Canada. There wasn't there sorry, There was legislation that was put out to ban it, but after an outcry from the community, we very quickly realized, as the Canadian population and in our legislative bodies, realized that it's not the threat that it is and needs to be out there. Next, we're going to look at the cons. So, cons of Apple: a single Apple ID breach can expose access to everything. Your Apple ID is your master key. And if that is exposed, your entire Apple environment is pretty much exposed fairly. Apple makes it extremely difficult to take your data on Apple and put it somewhere else. They try to lock you in as much as possible. And Apple's centralization means users have to trust Apple entirely. Any government demands or internal policies may compromise someone's privacy without them even knowing. Because at the end of the day, if the government comes and says, I want to see this person's account that you're storing all the data for, by law, Apple should and could give that data. We look at the cons of Windows. Windows 11 collects more telemetry data than any other operating system out there. It is the most targeted operating system for malware, ransomware, and spyware because of its market dominance. So the pro we saw for Mac OS is a con for Windows because they're so popular. Additionally, on the Microsoft operating systems, users install a lot of non Microsoft software, which can introduce a lot of vulnerabilities. This is where a lot of things that end up happening that are not Microsoft approved can be filled with malware and all of these different things. Now, I know everyone was waiting for this, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention Linux. Of course, I was not going to have this presentation without bringing up Linux because this is the distro that I use a lot of the time. So, Linux is an umbrella for a lot of sub operating systems, which are the different types of Linux. Linux is great because it's fully open source, meaning anyone can audit its code for security vulnerabilities or backdoors. No telemetry data is collected by default. It depends on your configuration and distribution or distro of choice to see how much privacy you need. And the frequent updates and patches from a global community is fantastic. I get excited to update my Linux software because it means someone's working on this. The few cons of Linux is that some proprietary software that people use every single day are just not going to work on Linux. This is forcing users to use workarounds and third party apps, which could compromise Opsec, so to speak. And there's limited hardware support for some peripherals. So, some edge cases that are happening, Linux is pretty lightweight depending on the distro. They go and they're able to install on a lot of different things. This is where the more advanced configurations that you need can prove to be a challenge depending on your needs. I see a quick comment I want to go before I leave the desktop operating system space, which we're not fully done yet, but it asks regarding Apple centralization. What's your take on proprietary solutions for OPSEC versus DIY OPSEC solutions that have to be configured yourself? I think that each has its pros and cons. It really depends on the level that you're looking for. So you give the example of Apple slash Proton. Apple has historically proved to be problematic for people's OPSEC. Proton has very few cases where governments have actually petitioned the company to provide them data, and Proton was just very much like, we don't have the data to give you. We can give you this small little piece of data here, but if we can't give you access to the emails, we don't store them. Do it yourself solutions are great for configuring it yourself because it gives you a lot of control, but that comes with a lot of challenges. So, for anyone who has ever managed their own email server for the sake of privacy and security, I imagine you're like me and you still have nightmares from what happened in managing your own email server. It is an extremely complicated thing to do. And then you also have all of this realm of reputation, sending emails, making sure it's all backed up. It provides a lot of challenges. Sometimes it's not worth the effort, but we come back to what we spoke about originally, which is the threat profile that you have associated to you, which becomes essential. I'm so happy to see that someone brought up Cubes OS because that's a Linux distro that focuses on sandboxing and virtual machines. So we spoke about this a little bit before, but a virtual machine is someone's best friend when it comes to privacy and OPSEC. I personally use hundreds of virtual machines, although I did a big cleanup the other day, so I think I'm finally down to under 100. So you can use any operating system on a virtual machine. You have basically a set of machines that you configure virtually, and then you can do whatever you want on that virtual machine. This concept is known as security by isolation. If you have one virtual machine for your emails, you have one virtual machine for your messaging, you have one virtual machine for your lab environment for whatever you're going to do, and then you have another virtual machine for all your documents. If any one of those is compromised, and a attacker or a surveilling eye or body is only going to have a part of the picture. A lot of people I know that have some of the best OPSEC that I've ever seen use virtual machines for everything. And all of their virtual machines are set up in a way to be as preserving as possible so that it keeps them safe on a regular basis. A great thing about virtual machines is that as soon as you're done with it, if you don't need it for anything else, you can delete it and then it's gone forever and destroyed. I say gone forever, but I know someone's going to comment, oh, but it can be recaptured through very advanced. Yes, if someone has physical access to your computer or your server and they want to rebuild a virtual machine, it is not an easy thing to do, but in the world of forensics, any of these things is possible technically. This is where you just download what's called a .iso file of any operating system, and you add it to a program like VirtualBox, and you can have a collection of machines on your one device that you can use as you see fit to protect your operational security and your privacy. Me personally, I have a server that sits underneath my desk that I have a tons of machines on. I'm using Proxmox because it's open source. It's fantastic. I've never heard anything but good things about Proxmox, and that's where I'm a really big fan of that. So we're going to move on from desktop environments, and we're going to look at mobile operating systems. So focusing on mobile operating systems could probably be an entire presentation on its own. So I wanted to keep this as high level as possible. When you buy an iPhone or you buy an Android, whether it's a Google Pixel, a Samsung Galaxy, or a Motorola, any of the devices out there, these are some questions that you can ask yourself. Who made it? Is the entity that I'm buying this device from, who's installing the operating system, trustworthy? Then we ask, okay, well, what's trustworthy here? I guess it becomes what's pre installed on it? Is there already spyware? Is there already apps that are known as bloatware, which is just bloated apps you don't need on your phone on a regular basis? Do I really have control over the settings that I set? So, a great example of this is on Apple. When you turn on airplane mode and you want to not have any connections outgoing, if your device needs to reset for a security update or whatever it might be, it's going to automatically turn airplane mode off when it reboots. That's kind of a big problem when you have a high threat profile and you want to remove the ability to have any connections going in and out of your phone. So with all of these things, it all comes down to is do you trust your phone right out of the box? Do you feel that when you buy an iPhone or you buy an Android, that I say, yes, I am fully comfortable for my privacy and my OPSEC that I can use this and not have to worry? If you do feel that way, that's fantastic. We're going to talk about a few reasons why we might change your mind today. But again, if your threat profile is low and you're on the other end of that scale where it's not as relevant to you, it kind of makes a big difference. So we're going to talk a little personal. What do I use? On a day-to-day basis, I use what's known as Graphene OS. Graphene OS is a fantastic device. I have it on 2 of my 6 phones here. And some of the reasons that Graphene is so powerful is because there's no Google Play services by default. I don't have a Play Store. I can enable a sandboxing function to get Google Play, but for me, I don't even use that. I use alternative app stores such as F-Droid and Aurora, which is a connection to Google Play Store without really to rely on Google, so you can sign in anonymously. These is how I operate my phone on a regular basis. Now, when most people look at my phone, they don't really recognize any of the apps that are here besides a few basic ones. That's the Proton, Signal, standard notes that I shared earlier. It is decentralized and open source. So, we talked about open source a little bit before. Open source is fantastic because a community of people can read through the code itself and determine this is a problem. This has a backdoor. This is exploitable. Because of this, and the fact that no data is sent back to any centralized system, keeping it decentralized, it's more secure for an individual such as myself or those with a higher threat profile. We have hardened privacy and security. The entire mission of Graphene OS is a private and secure device that users can use. It is encrypted user data by default, and there's no built-in tracking or telemetry. So a lot of people might be asking, okay, this sounds fantastic. What else? How do I get one of these devices? So Graphene OS is installed on Pixel devices, and you can go to their website, which I've included below, which will walk you through how to flash the Graphene OS operating system onto a Pixel device. And the way that I explain it to people is this is basically a Google phone without Google. Now, when you're on the really extreme side of privacy and operational security, there are some people out there who won't even let their phone be turned on or connect to a cell tower when they're in their home. This is where that's next level. There are people who either remove their SIM cards, turn on airplane mode, or do any of these things. Graphene OS is fantastic because when you put on airplane mode, all connections are dead. It won't even ping to the closest cell tower. If you have a really high threat profile and you want no one to know where you sleep at night, where your family is, and you want to keep everything as safe as possible, these are the next level things you need to do to make sure that it stays safe in the world. If you don't want to install Graphene OS, but you want to find a way to cut connections of your current devices, I didn't include it in this presentation because truthfully, I just thought of it. But you can buy what's known as a Faraday bag or a Faraday cage. These are bags that you can put your devices in that is shutting off all connections outside of that bag. This is, they come in many different forms. It could be a box, a bag, it could be a full room. This is where it will be very interesting that if you have that higher threat profile, you can truly shut off those connections from finding you. We'll talk a little bit more about metadata later on and how that'll impact this environment. But let's move on from mobile operating systems. We're going to talk a bit about networking because it's an essential part of how everything works. And I think it's important that we have a brief conversation about it so you can figure out what areas are important to lock down in the networking space. So, a few people here might be familiar with what's known as a domain name servers, a DNS. A DNS is basically a server's way of knowing what website you're trying to go to. So, classic example is when you go to facebook.com, that request is sent to a DNS to which the DNS says, oh, facebook.com, that is this IP address, and sends you to that IP address. Because at the end of the day, websites might have nice, easy names for us to remember them, but they're all just IP addresses. And a DNS service is really a terrible system for someone's privacy. If you're using just a standard DNS out there, it's possible that someone can share your requests to anyone who asks for it. You don't really know if the DNS service is respecting your privacy and compromising your OPSEC in a way. So I've included here some privacy focused DNS services. I love Quad 9. I've been following Quad 9 for many years, so I'm a little biased. One of the things that I really like about Quad 9 is you can read that they've gone to fight the court systems based on requests from governments about letting access to their data or blocking certain websites. They believe in an open and free internet, which is why I'm a huge supporter of them. Cloudflare has a great DNS service, which has a lot of benefits to that. There is some speculation around Cloudflare, so I'm sure some people in the audience are like, "Ooh, I don't know about that one. That's a maybe." But additionally, there's also Libra DNS, which is a DNS you can set, which is pretty well reputable that people trust a lot of the way. But when you get to the next level, you have Pi-hole. I love my Pi-hole within my condo. See, that was bad Opsec. I just told everyone I lived in a condo. Anyway, my Pi-hole is something you can manually set as the DNS in your home so that you can choose the incoming and outgoing connections that you accept or don't accept. It is an extremely granular way to control the connections of your home environment. Now, it's can be complicated to set up depending where you live. It is dependent on your internet modem, what it allows you to do, and all these different things. But if you can utilize the combination of any of these of a Pi-hole with Quad 9 as a backup DNS, that's a really good OPSEC opportunity and privacy preserving opportunity for an individual. Something that a lot of people don't know is you can get specific DNSs that are focused for privacy or focused for protection. I know that CIRA, which is the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, I believe I got that right. They provide a DNS and they provide a few options. One of the ones that I've recommended to a lot of my friends who have children is you can get a child friendly DNS so that if your children are going to any websites that they shouldn't be going to, it's blocked at the DNS level so it won't even load on their site. So if I were to exit this presentation, and this is a personal thing on my Pi-hole, and I tried to go to facebook.com, it actually doesn't load on my network. I don't use social media because that would be some pretty bad OPSEC. This is where it is currently blocked in my entire network of Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, all the main social medias. I block them because I don't need them. And that's the kind of granularity level you get with Pi-hole to be able to do that type of thing. Now, my friends get really mad when they come over and they can't access their TikTok, but that's a them problem, not so much me. So let's talk about IP addresses. An IP address follows you around the internet pretty much a lot of the time of where you're going. Now, there's such thing as a dynamic IP and a static IP, depending on where you are in the world. Where I am in the world, my modem has a dynamic IP, which means that every time I unplug my modem and plug it back in, I get a new IP address. There are other metrics that sites can use to track me, but this is a great way to do so. So every night before bed, I unplug my modem, I go to bed, and when I wake up, I plug it back in and I get a new IP for the day. If every website, app, and place you go online has your IP address, and if you have a static IP address, this is one that's not going to change on a regular basis, people are going to be able to build a map of where you're going, what you're doing, and all these different things. An IP address, I say this, but I haven't truly looked it up, but I wouldn't be surprised. It's probably the number one digital identification that is subpoenaed by government and law enforcement to find people and track them. If you have an IP address that is going to a malicious website or a sketchy website, so to speak, and that same IP address is going to Facebook and then Instagram, and then it's going to look at what's happening on TikTok on your computer, it's pretty easy for a government entity or a surveillance entity to look and say, hey, this IP address is obviously accessing all these sites. I might not be able to get the information from the malicious website. Let's go ask Facebook. Hey, Facebook, this IP address, who is this? And they'll say, oh, this IP address accessed this person's profile. This is John Doe. Now you know who John Doe is. An IP address is the one of the many strings that follow you around the internet, which can be used, abused against you. Next, We're going to talk a little bit about VPNs, but before there were VPNs, there were proxies. A proxy is a middleman between your device and the internet to hide your IP. There are general proxies and there are residential proxies. So, a general proxy are IP addresses assigned from a data center or some type of infrastructure. A residential proxy is a IP address assigned from an internet service provider. These are your Bells, your Rogers, your AT&Ts of the world. Each one of these has different use cases, but the best way to understand a proxy differentiated from a VPN is a proxy is more app specific. If you have a singular virtual machine that you want to proxy for certain things, if you want to reverse proxy to be able to access your own network from external places, this is what a proxy really comes down to. I like to put the used for in this presentation because general ones are for general anonymity, non sensitive tasks, but a lot of cyber criminals are looking for geo restricted access. So they have to use a residential proxy to be able to get that. This is a great question. I just noticed on the side here. Thank you, Rowan. And I am a big fan of the tool Wiggle. It's basically a tool that if you know someone's SSID, you can lock into their geographic location. So the question is, in scenarios where individuals use unique or personally identifiable SSIDs across multiple locations, how viable is SSID tracking for identifying movement patterns or home addresses? What countermeasures would you recommend to mitigate this exposure? So that's a fantastic question. I want to think before I answer this. So let me make sure I get this right. What ends up happening is the best way to mitigate this is a more generic SSID is better in this case. If you just have an SSID that's home, think about all the people in the world who have that SSID will not be able to pinpoint you because there's just so many results within Wiggle. And if you're using specific SSIDs for a reason, you have to ask yourself why. A lot of people think that a more unique SSID is more secure, but ultimately it really comes down to the password being more secure in this case. And so, my recommendation for mitigating this type of exposure is to use a generic SSID. Now, I do know some people who are traveling from location to location will use the same SSID with the same password so they don't have to reconnect their device once they boot it up, which is a convenience thing. And I understand why someone would do this. But viability via SSID tracking for movement patterns or home addresses, it's 100% viable. It's something that can be done, and it's something you do need to take into consideration to ensure that you're staying safe for your physical location. Yes. So actually, not quite Jason. SSID isn't the username logged into the computer. An SSID is when you look for a Wi Fi network, it's the name of the Wi Fi network that we're talking about. So if someone gets access to this, they can throw it into an app like Wiggle, and then they'll be able to do that. Thank you, Rowan, for answering that. So we move on from proxies to VPNs. So, do you need a VPN? A very controversial conversation. So, I am a big believer that you only need a VPN in the following cases. You're on a public network you don't know. If you're at the airport, if you're at a coffee shop, if you're at some random place, you probably need a VPN because you don't know what's happening on that network. They could have a pie hole set up, specifically track your exact computer MAC address, and then they could look at all the data and they could run a man in the middle attack or do all these different things. You can use a VPN to change your location. I'm sure absolutely none of us are guilty of ever changing our location to get better shows on a streaming service. That's just ridiculous, right? But if you need to be in a certain location to access something, this is where a VPN comes in handy. If you are evading a very specific source blocking your IP, a VPN is going to change your IP address, which makes it easier to do so. As we get more advanced with more websites, there's hardware monitoring, there's other data points they can use to block you from accessing their service. But at a basic level, if they're just blocking your IP and you need to get around that for some reason, you can use a VPN. Only use a VPN if you are paying for it or set it up yourself. It is an important thing to remember. If something is free, you are the product. Absolutely, they're going to sell your data at any chance they get. I've recommended with the team and talking to them that there's Proton VPN, iVPN, and Mulvad VPN. These three have documented situations where they have fought for the privacy of their users and have been third party audited to ensure they're not collecting logs. So, this is an important thing. If you're ever looking for a VPN, the most important thing you need to look for is that we do not collect logs. Now, if you're going to pay for a VPN, you're either going to use a credit card, which is going to link it right back to you in that sense. But this was a really, let's take a step back. It's really important that if you need a VPN for an extreme threat profile, you need to get that VPN in a way that doesn't tie back to your identity. And these three options provide that ability to you. Other than what's here, I've included a link that is a very famous GitHub post of someone who just bashes VPNs, talking about how they're basically useless except for very specific use cases, of which I've included here, which is a fun read after we send this presentation to everyone. You can feel free to check out that link. The free version of Proton VPN is a question that we have, is that it is more trustworthy because they're using it as a funnel. They have actually used the free version of Proton VPN to allow people who live in censorship focused areas to access the external internet. So they have a great resource to give people as much as possible. Even though it's free, I would still recommend Proton VPN's free version if you really need a VPN, depending on your use case. They give you a limited amount of what locations can be done, but this is probably for the best that if you need a free VPN, Proton VPN is a stronger way to go on that front. Tor and the art of anonymity. So the Tor is a browser, which we'll talk about browsers later on, but what it really stands for is the onion router. It's a way that things are processed online that hide your IP address in the best way possible, so to speak. It's a privacy focused network. Now, a lot of people, they see Tor and their first thought is this is all for criminal activity. This is what Tor is built for. It's for criminals to be used. The answer is no, actually. It wasn't built for criminals to be used. Tor historically was made by the US government, which whenever I say people lose all trust and credibility for it, but it was made as a secure communications platform so that different military and different agencies can really utilize talking to each other in a secure way and sending things over a connection that is safe. Now, a lot of people think that, I'm going to use Tor because I want to do something illegal. And most people default in their mind to thinking that Tor is used by criminals. But there's another side to this that a lot of people often forget. If you live in a censorship focused area, Tor is an anti censorship tool. So, what you can do with Tor is if you're viewing this presentation from North Korea, which I highly doubt is the case, but if you are, you would have to do so through Tor. Tor allows you to bypass the censorship that has been implemented by governing bodies, and so to speak. The important things to note is that Tor is very slow. You will have to sacrifice speed so that you can use it. Tor can be difficult to navigate. You can use it as a normal browser, but for Tor specific addresses, which are more secure, it's this long string that you see up here. And that can be something that you need to really focus on to know what these are. There's not like a list of these that you can go to. Tor is, as I mentioned, is not just an app. You can route other apps through Tor. So we spoke about mobile devices earlier. There's an app called Orbot, which allows you to route your phone's traffic through Tor. And last but not least, Tor can be compromised on an exit node. So imagine a chain of 5 connections. There's your IP address, which goes into an entry node, and then it goes into another node, and then it goes onto an exit node, which then goes to the final destination. In this entire chain, if one of those nodes is compromised, your privacy can be, I wouldn't say completely nulled. This is why there's multiple node hops, but it makes a big difference in kind of protecting it. So I see a question here. If someone owns the entry or exit node, your privacy is completely nulled. Isn't that correct? Yes and no. I wouldn't say it's completely nulled, but it does make it a little more complicated to stay anonymous online if one of your entry or exit nodes is compromised on that front. So it's not a bulletproof thing. There's actually no such thing as bulletproof one tool protection. It is a combination of a lot of different things. Now, I'm probably going to start a big debate here, but the one thing I want to mention about Tor is that if you are using Tor, a lot of people think I should turn on my VPN before using Tor. Don't do that. And this is a big debate on the entire internet about how to properly use Tor. But if you read the Tor documentation, it says do not connect to Tor with a VPN. And the reason for this case is because now you need to trust your VPN for that connection to the entry node. And when that's done in that sense, how are you sure that your VPN isn't compromised or won't sell that information, which ruins the entire process? But this is something spoken about a lot within the Tor communities of what is happening. So, we've gone through a lot of different networking, hardware, operating systems. I want to talk about how to practically stay safe online in the modern world today. So, this is going to be a lot of different things, but I'm excited to jump into it. First is choosing the right browser. I was going to compile a big list of browser pros and cons, and then I realized that this guy already did it for me. And I'm a big fan of privacytests.org. You can navigate to this. I included the link at the bottom. You'll be able to click. But this truly is a fantastic breakdown of a plethora of different browsers and where they have strengths and weaknesses. Not only do we have desktop browsers, we have desktop private modes, as in your incognito windows, your iOS browsers, your Android browsers, your nightly builds, and your nightly private modes. A nightly build is, think of it more of like a developer build for this. One thing I should clarify is these numbers you see at the bottom are the actual version numbers of these browsers. So someone's asking here, I always thought Firefox over Chrome for privacy. It depends on how you've configured your Firefox. There's a lot of great add-ins you can use that will be better to help you secure the privacy. I should clarify, Jason, I apologize. This is not in any order. I believe actually, looking now, that this is in alphabetical order. So this is not to say that Brave is better than Chrome, which is better than Tor. Like, this is just an alphabetical order of how they've listed it. But when you go to the site, you'll see a large list of very specific technology tests that have either passed or failed, which is a fantastic way to do this. Now, browsers are compromised every day on a regular basis. We see this a lot at Flare, where people have stolen all the information from a browser. But if you're able to use a hardened browser and have better things configured to protect yourself, you're doing a great job in making sure that your browser is a safe point. Because everything we're about to go through in this section of practical security is relevant to the individual that has the threat profile. So I see here add-ons profile is used in fingerprinting though. Yes, it can be, but it really depends if you keep it minimal and if you find a way, and when I say find a way, if you are looking to stay as private as possible, you can actually do what we spoke about with virtual machines. You can use several browsers for different objectives. And that way, you are able to spread out your privacy across different things so that if one is compromised, they don't get the full picture. And that's where it's important to do security by isolation in this sense. Moving on from browsers, we talk about email. So I included again these scales of I do not care about privacy and I need to live in the woods. So I'm not knocking any of these any of these email providers. I want to clarify. Typically, Gmail, Outlook, Apple, they have a lot of privacy issues with them. The people who use these typically don't care. Apple Mail is notorious for scanning all of the contents within your email as part of their CSAM detection. Outlook and Gmail have now been built with these AI integrations. I saw someone mention Copilot before. These AI integrations that are scanning all of your emails for summarizing and responses and all these different types of things. These are less privacy preserving mail providers. If you're more balanced in your needs, like myself, you use either Proton Mail or Tuta Mail, which now has been rebranded to Tuta. I hope I'm saying that right. And these are mail providers that are focused on security and privacy. These ones give you a little more flexibility. One of the things in Proton Mail that I really like is they have this integration with simple login, where for every time I sign up to somewhere, you can make an alias. So I have way too many, probably hundreds of aliases that are allowing me to sign up to all these different websites with different email addresses that are not related to me at all. And they all come back to my Proton Mail inbox. If you need to live in the woods and you are truly essentially need to be off the grid, you use a temporary mail provider. This is where you sign up, you get like a 10-minute inbox, and then you are sending emails, getting your receiving emails, and you're good to rock and roll at that point. All three of these are across the scale of privacy. But let's be real for a second. All apps you sign up to today run on email or phone number. But for the email part of it, if you can spread out which email you're providing into these, it makes a big difference in how you can stay protected on that. I actually have not heard of Collab Now with a K. So that's something I'm very excited to look into afterwards. If you join the Discord Q&A after, I'd love to hear more about it if you've used it before. What about the differences enterprise versus personal Gmail and similar? So enterprise in the modern world is having more AI integrations that's happening. I think that they each possess their own level of privacy. But if you have an enterprise Gmail account, whoever owns the enterprise as the admin has access to everything. So you have to kind of divide this into two different areas. There's protecting yourself from Gmail directly, and then protecting yourself from the enterprise that owns your Gmail account. Those are two very different things with different threat profiling that's involved in that area. So, from email, usually when you write an email and you create an account somewhere, you make a username. So, usernames are a great way for someone to be connected individually across a ton of different websites. I've included a tool here, which is LinkLook, which is a way to look up someone's username and all the permutations of that username so that you can find out all of their accounts online. This is just one of many tools that are out there that is able to be used in this sense. As you see on the right, this is how they're able to connect this person all to this one identity of Jack July, which is the author of this right here. Just to be clear, they decided to dox themselves in the process. So, a dox, just for the record, so everyone's aware, is when someone posts all of your information, including your social insurance number, your usernames, your passwords, and all these different things into one spot for everyone to see. But this is all connected so that we can do research and figure out who is this person. Because if they are connected on their Twitter and they're hack the box and we get to their LinkedIn eventually, the LinkedIn might just have their name on it. So we can do username hunting in this sense to figure out someone's true identity because maybe they used this username on some service 10 years ago that had their real name associated with it too. Next, we have passwords. So you can actually hunt through passwords also. This is something that's really utilized in a lot of places. If you're using the same password everywhere, which we do not recommend in any world, That's a good way to figure out who you are. If you have the same password across 20 different accounts and it's a pretty unique password, it's not just, some of the most leaked passwords in the world, but it's a really unique password, there's a good chance that this is you using the same account in a ton of different places. So, as a username, the same password can identify you across different elements. I included this right here. This is what your password should look like when you submit it somewhere. And the way to accomplish this is to reinforce good password hygiene by using a password manager. I'm a big fan of Bitwarden, KeePass, and 1Password. There are tons of password managers out there, but when you're looking for a password manager, it's important to look and see, are they using encryption? Are they integrated into all these different things? And this is where we look at what's best for you and your threat profile. A complex password is great, but MFA is better. That's multi factor authentication. So that's where you either get a text message. This is where you either do a OTP, which is a one-time password that when you open on your phone, you put in your password and it says, please put in the digits of your MFA, and you click a button and it generates for you. MFA is on a scale. I'm sure I'll spark some debate with this, but the way that it goes is a one-time password is most likely one of the more secure options. An email that you get emailed the one-time password is pretty decent there. But if you're using a text message to get a one-time password, that is probably on the lower end because it's easy to spoof and easy to trick on that also. Why didn't you include Proton Pass? Great question. It is because I just didn't. I don't have a real reason. Proton Pass is really good. I haven't personally had the chance to use Proton Pass yet, but I've heard really good things and I have access to it. I just haven't had the chance to use it. I personally am using Bitwarden and KeePass on two different things. KeePass is a local password manager. So we come back to, if someone has physical access to your device, that is very, very bad. And they can kind of go and look at the master password and figure out everything. But KeePass is great if you don't want any password database connecting to the internet. You're not going to integrate it anywhere. I have my KeePass on a secure system that I have access to and only me, that's behind an encrypted system on top of an encrypted database. That's where I really keep my KeePass. And yes, the KeePass XC is the superior KeePass as of right now. So next, we're going to talk about a rainbow table and what hashing is. A hash is similar to how we spoke about a cipher and encryption, is a password's way of being encrypted somewhere else. So it's really important to understand that a hash is the correct way for a company to store a password on their databases. If you ever hear of a company that says we store passwords in plain text, run as far away as possible. Everything should be hashed. A rainbow table is a collection of, as you see here, you have password with this MD5 hash. Imagine this table, but with a billion entries. A rainbow table will try to crack a password by going through the hash and figuring out the right password combination. They've already hashed all of these things so that it's easier to search through this database and find the correct hash for your password, and then de-hash the password so they can see the plain text password, and then they're able to access your systems. It's important to think of your password as you're doing things. If you have one password for all of your different things, it's really bad Opsec because it just takes one of those things being compromised for everything to be compromised on that front. Next, we have metadata. So metadata is a lot harder to hide, and a lot of the apps that are out there in the world are not made metadata resistance. Metadata is often accessible to service providers, websites, adversaries, even if encryption is used. It is the data that is part of your crumbs of the cookie. Not like a internet cookie, just an actual cookie as a metaphor. So advertisers, governments, and a lot of different people are using metadata to build a user profile and to track movement through location data. So we spoke earlier about SSIDs and using a tool like Wiggle to identify someone's location. This can be a sense of a metadata that you didn't realize was being leaked when you were using a service, which can be used against you. Intelligence agencies rely on metadata for large scale surveillance because it's easy to collect and analyze than the content itself. So here's an example. Everyone on the internet, for the most part, especially in the cybersecurity community, loves cats. And I took this picture of my friend's cat many years ago. I actually pulled the metadata from this picture, and you could see that I took this on a Google phone that was a Pixel 5. It was with the back camera, and it has the all the information, and my flash did not fire. Now, I, of course, have turned off the location feature. But what a lot of people don't realize is when you take a photo, if you haven't set it up, that photo is going to actually include the longitude and latitude of where that photo was taken. So think about this is that when you're taking photos and you're uploading them, if they're not stripping the metadata, someone can find your exact location that you took that photo. And your physical location is pretty important for your Opsec and privacy. So this is where metadata becomes super important. Now, one of the better apps I've seen for metadata resistance is known as Session Messenger. Session is really good at stripping metadata and making sure that it's not being used against you to locate you and do these different types of things. But it's important to remember that metadata is a part of this ecosystem because if you're letting your metadata leak, then you are running into the trap of someone being able to find you or do something with that information or build a profile against you because it might not be the main content you were doing, but that metadata is going to be a way of they're able to track you and do these things. The oil drillers of the internets. So I'm sure I just saw someone linked geospy.ai. Yes, we will talk about that in a moment. I promise you, I did not forget about that one. So selling to advertisers and companies are data brokers. Data brokers are collecting as much information about you as possible so that they could sell it to the highest bidder. So this can be done to advertisers because we all get custom ads that are sent to us for targeted advertising. This is where they're buying all of this data from data brokers so they know what targeted ads to show you. They provide risk assessments. So think about this. Think about if your insurance company raises your premiums because they bought data from a data broker about you that you're doing something that they think you shouldn't. And it's important, something that they think you shouldn't. It could be as innocent as going 2 kilometers or 2 miles per hour over the speed limit. Just two. If they had this data, they can say, nope, you speed, we're going to increase your premiums on your car. All because they had the data bought from data brokers that you didn't even consent to be given to them. And then there's a lot of examples of governments and law enforcement agencies purchasing this data for tracking individuals. So a lot of people ask me, well, what am I supposed to do with all these data brokers? There's two arguments I often get. The first one is they already have all this information. Why should I care? Okay. So if they already have all this information, do you want them to have any more information? A lot of people sit and they say, all my data has been collected. What am I supposed to do? And my answer to them is very simply it's like, well, you're not dead. So you're going to be making more data as you live your life. You can stop this now and protect yourself so they don't collect more information about you. To do this, I included a link below. This is a big data broker opt out list. Luckily, depending on your jurisdiction, European Union is very lucky to have the GDPR. Californians are very happy and very lucky to have CCRA and CCPA. But there are legislations that allow you to opt out of your information being collected. And that's really powerful because then if your information is collected, you can go to them and say, I opted out. Why are you doing this? And that comes with a whole other set of actions that you can take in these types of situations. But data brokers are buying a lot of information from people. In fact, there's this great story online that a TV show bought from a data broker information about government officials. And they showed everybody. And they said that, hey, we're going to leak this to the entire world and it's totally legal to do so. And I bet you, and I know so, that those government officials went haywire trying to figure out how they can stop this moving forward. So careful where you turn your camera on. So this is right now focused on where you go online and turn your video on. So a lot of people will go on a Discord call, which I'm literally about to do right after this presentation. I'm going to turn my camera on, and anyone is able to take a screenshot of my face and put it in this search engine. And you can do that to anyone, anywhere, whether they're in a YouTube video, a Netflix show, although Netflix makes it kind of hard to screenshot, and all these different types of things. That this is a search engine for someone's face. And these are very powerful to figure out someone's identity. Think about as innocent as you're online and you're on a Zoom call with someone and it's a confidential thing. And all you did is what I did. On my name here, I wrote Mitch C. You take a screenshot of my face, you upload it to this website, and you'll be able to find out all the other places that my face is and all the different matches and figure out more about me and my identity, which is a risk to my privacy and OPSEC. There are some people I know who refuse to go on a camera online for this very reason that these tools exist. Cameras in the real world. So that's what you do online. But what about when you're out in the public at the grocery store? So it's just a reality that depending where you are in the world, there's a lot of different cameras that are keeping track of you on a regular basis. So all I ask is the next time you're out in public, try to count how many cameras you see. It'll probably be a lot more than you thought. I was practicing this presentation and I was showing my friend a few of these slides. And the joke that they made is there's a lot of these cameras that you do see, but there's also a lot of these cameras that you don't see. And that's also just as important because think about it. If these cameras are keeping track of you in the real world, that links back to your identity. And we're going to talk about that through the next few slides that are coming up. So before we do that, I want to talk about biometric performance. One of my friends, he is an expert on this, and we've had a lot of different conversations. And these conversations have exploded due to the AI crazed world we live in. So think about this. The way that you move your mouse based on the speed, the positioning, how like every little minute aspect of it compared to how you type on your keyboard, your words per minute, your keyboard strokes, a heat map seeing which keys you type the most, or how you touch on your phone, how you do this on a regular. These are all things that can profile you as an individual. This is known as biometric performance. So, for example, I always use this example on phones specifically. A lot of people, they have a cell phone like this and they touch all over. And when you turn your screen off, you leave little fingerprint smudges. Imagine that times a million to understand what someone's doing on their phone and who they are because it's a similar action. So I play a lot of chess on my phone. So sometimes when I turn my phone on and when I turn my phone off and I see a black screen with just dots of all over the chessboard of where I was moving. And it's ironic because any person who's hitting those on a regular basis, you can figure out plays chess on their phone because there's no other logical use case in this sense of why someone would be doing that. This applies to your mouse movements and your keyboard and all these different things. It used to be an entire field of people running systems and algorithms to check the identity of individuals for biometric performance. But with data collection as rampant as we see it today, and as data platforms with artificial intelligence and machine learning have grown significantly, the ability to profile at these individual biometric levels is insane. It is able to be processed and profile you more than you would have ever thought previously. How do you fight against this? How do you fight against your human behavior? It's a really tough thing to do. It's like you can't change your eyeball if you've taken an ocular scan of something. You can try and do things a little bit differently, But this is a much harder one to fight. The only way to fight this one is to ensure that certain apps and companies aren't collecting this data to start with. This is where it becomes important. On this slide, one of the things that I didn't include because it's not biometric, but a lot of cyber criminals can be profiled based on how they type, how they talk, how they do certain things. And there are some who are really advanced who will actively make spelling mistakes, knowing there's a spelling mistake because they don't want to link back to them. And they try to do these different personas of different things so that they don't identify themselves through a singular way. That's what you have to do for biometric performance. Make a few mistakes, slam your keyboard, throw a Q into a sentence even though it doesn't belong. That's how you really trip up these systems and create a way to not be tracked in a biometric way. But this is probably one of the more complicated ways to fight, but one of the more advanced ways that someone will be tracked. It's a very fun conversation. My friend and I, we've had a lot of conversations about this. It's a really good time to talk about. I'm happy to answer any additional questions afterwards. So let's talk about money. Um, Everything runs on credit cards these days. So it's important to understand that your spending history is not that private. Your purchasing history can be accessed by others, whether it's law enforcement, apps you give permissions, and more. I remember I was working for a startup a few years ago, and someone would give the permission for this startup app to have access to your bank account. Not to do anything malicious, but for growth of that account. And within doing so, we as the company had all of this data to query all of the transactions of all of our users. To me, that's insane. That's a large amount of power for any one company to possess in this type of environment. Every time you use your credit card anywhere in the world, someone knows where you are. Your credit card is in your real name. I don't know many people who have lots of credit cards because ultimately your credit card is either in your own name or in a business name. In a business name, typically under the business itself, will have your identity somewhere listed in there. So using a credit card will immediately identify who you are as a person. If you use a credit card for any of the services we talked above that you pay for, that's linked to you now. What you buy tells a story. Now, a lot of people are going to say, okay, I'll just use cash everywhere. Well, here's the thing about cash is that if you want to use cash at a store, you have to make sure that store doesn't have any cameras. Because if your face is on camera, it's now linked to your identity again. We've had a conversation, and by we, I mean, I've spoken to a few people internally and externally about this. And how do you stay anonymous with your payments online? And a lot of people give me a lot of make sure you're not on camera, wear a hat. If you have a beard, do all your shopping and then shave your beard off, whatever it might be. This is where it's essential to understand how payment tracking in your financial institutions will sell your data and tell people by request who you are and what you're doing and why it's important. So basically, every time you use your credit card, someone knows exactly who you are most of the time. And then a lot of people say just use cryptocurrency. So let's talk about cryptocurrency. But before we do, let's talk about pseudonymity versus anonymity. So a pseudonymity is an actions that are linked to a pseudonym, a fake or alternative name. If you have Bruce Wayne as your main guy that you put your identity for on everything, people will be looking for a Bruce Wayne. And when they find it, that can connect back to you. This is a fake or alternative name you use on a regular basis. Anonymity is actions that are not linked to any consistent identifier. So you're probably asking, why is this important? Well, why do we need to know the difference between these two? Because when we look at cryptocurrency, your wallet address is technically a pseudonym of an identity. It connects back to you. So factors that compromise privacy in cryptocurrency is a reused address. If you're using the same wallet address everywhere all the time, it's pretty easy to look at what that transactional story is and figure out who you might be. When you want to take that cryptocurrency and cash it out through an exchange, Most of these cryptocurrency exchanges require what's known as a KYC, a know your customer, linking your identity to them, your wallet, and all these different things. It becomes tough to actually take your cryptocurrency out in a secure way that makes it that it's not tied to your identity. There are some really advanced network analysis and analysts who are specifically de-anonymizing transactions using advanced algorithms. This one is a little bit of a farther stretch, but it is possible and has been done depending on the encryption of a cryptocurrency. And then we talk about metadata leaks again. If you're leaking metadata like your IP address or your wallet activity or where you're spending or all these different things, I know that some stores actually accept cryptocurrency. If you have a wallet with a lot of crypto in it, and then you go and spend it at this store, which is a physical location, geographically, you most likely live within the vicinity of this store now, and you've compromised your Opsec and privacy. So a lot of people think cryptocurrency is the answer, that I can be fully anonymous online by using cryptocurrency. The answer is no, for the most part, but you can be if you had good OPSEC, which is what we're talking about today. So we're going to talk about where to learn more. So these first two books are much more practical ways of learning. So I have, of course, Extreme Privacy here. This is a true breakdown of everything you can do from mobile devices, physical devices, where you live, your wallets. This is probably one of the best resources in the world for practical steps on how to have better privacy in OPSEC. The next, The Art of Invisibility by Kevin Mitnick, is a great book about how to be safe in the age of Big Brother and big data. The Privacy Mission and Privacy is Power are more ideas and kind of topics that are spoken about. It doesn't give you the exact way to be private online, but it talks about the methodology of what it is to be private online and what you should do in these types of cases. Carissa Villiers is the author of Privacy is Power, and I was listening to a podcast the other day where she says every data point you keep safe matters. And I immediately wanted to put it in this presentation because we spoke about a lot of things today. And it just takes one of those data points to be compromised for your privacy in OPSEC to be compromised as well. It's a lot of work to keep everything as safe as possible, which is why we talk about this. Convenience is the opposite of good OPSEC. So one of the things that I always tell people often think that the opposite of privacy is security is being not secure. It's actually convenience. Everything you do on the I don't care about privacy scale is a convenient life. I have 6 cell phones in front of me. It is extremely inconvenient when one of them rings because I need to figure out which one of my phones is ringing. I have multiple computers. I have a server. I need to go the extra step every time I want to do something. I live a very inconvenient life. That being said, my threat profile is a little bit higher based on what I'm doing. So if you are willing to sacrifice convenience, having good OPSEC is really easy. Instead of going to that store that's right around the corner and using a credit card, drive a little bit further. If you don't want your cell phone to ever relate back to your home area, turn your cell phone off when you come home. Only use your computer, which is properly configured with all the things you need. These are the areas that is really important. And I go back to what I originally said about privacy is not just about you. Some of you can probably go about your life and say, I don't need these types of things. I'm going to just let everyone do. I'm going to let data brokers have full legal rights to take all my stuff. We come back to when someone needs privacy, if we're all not fighting for it, then they aren't going to have it in their moment of dire need. We look at places in the world who live in censorship, who live in dictatorships. These are the people who suffer on a regular basis And these are the ones who don't have the privacy they need to live their lives in a safe and secure way. And that's why OPSEC is so important, whether it's for you personally to keep yourself safe, whether you are hunting cyber criminals and being part of the threat intelligence world and you want to keep your identity safe so that you can do your job. These are the different areas where it becomes absolutely essential for good OPSEC to operate. So that's the end of our presentation. I really appreciate everyone joining and being active in the comments. It was fantastic to be a part of it. We're going to do a Q&A right after this. I'm going to log into Discord in a moment, and then I'll be in the general chat that we can talk, and I'll be on voice. But feel free to register for our next training, which is Cybercrime Forums, Investigation and Intelligence Gathering by Nick Ascoli, who's fantastic. I've had the chance to speak with him. We're going to send this presentation to everyone so you can click through the links and review it on any questions you might have. But I look forward to seeing you all next time. It's been a pleasure, and I'll see a lot of people in the Discord very shortly.